I'm honored by today's opportunity, which has been provided by Professor Bolchakov and honored guests. I acknowledge the honor to participate here on this occasion in sharing the memory of the 90th birthday of my departed friend and collaborator, Kuznecova. For this opportunity, I'm grateful to Professor Bolchakov and to the invitation to the historically venerable tradition of the Academy of Sciences. Time is short, so I shall therefore come directly to the topic which I recognize and share under the title of the current prospects for the preservation of mankind. It is a subject of my own increasing importance for both Russia and the world presently. It is a matter of fresh insights of urgent relevance and absolute historical importance. It is an honor of the scientific progress in the world as a whole, respecting matters now closely at hand. These are matters of both the progress of science and mankind alike. They are matters of immensely great value, matters to be considered from the standpoint of deepening margins of insights given to me in course of study of certain crucial implications, which I have lately recognized as deeper insights into what Vladimir Ivanovich Vernadsky had accomplished, both for science and for mankind's future. These are matters in his work which for me, when considered in the present light, have the relatively greatest future importance for mankind throughout this planet. Consequently, for me today, the emphasis on the work of Vladimir Ivanovich Vernadsky's work in science is to be located in what I have come to recognize with even improving insights has an even deeper relevance in his role as a scientist for the place of mankind's attempts to perfect our insights into the prospects of the future destiny of mankind. These are not merely measures for Earth today, but for a deeper insight into the distinction of the future role of the true principle of human life within our solar system in particular as well. This requires a deeper insight into the distinction of the quality of life of the human species, the quality of being the life of the human species, the quality of being absolutely above all other species known to us presently. The work of Vladimir Ivanovich's progress from during his life as a servant of the truly unique principle of human life is therefore to be placed apart from and above all presently known other considerations. His work now carries discoverable imports for us today beyond anything customarily considered by science heretofore. Therefore now, the notion of life as occurring within time is implicitly to be recognized as an essential emphasis that the meaning of time is to be located actually not in time as such, but rather as the measure of time within the bounds of the authority of the most unique and the most efficient principle of progress presently available, respecting the knowledge and practice of science by human life itself. The urgent matter immediately thus before us is that of present follies among nations, errors which would be corrected by a proper order in the cooperation of the willing nations immediately among us. In brief, we must act to end war as a global institution, an institution which must become itself relegated effectively to the past. We now face the reality of the presently rising threat of a global potential which menaces our planet with the threats of thermonuclear war's capability to bring about summary extinction of the human species. This demands that we lift our passions above the notions of mass warfare. We should have recognized and overcome that such warfare in earlier times, what they mean. To accomplish that purpose, a new order among sovereign nations, ending the influence of modern oligarchical empires in the Zeus tradition, is presently a virtually immediate precondition for the continuation of human existence itself. The work of Vladimir Ivanovich, when suitably considered by actually qualified scientists, and these matters must be presently reconsidered with the greatest regard for relevance and therefore must be considered from a retrospective view of the imperfections of previous customs. What is wanted presently is a prescience which reaches into and beyond the ordinary notions of past experiences respecting the ordinary past notions of our solar system. Now, instead of mere notions of space and time, the fact of the inherent immortality expressed by the very fact of successively progressive generations of the human mind, as such, shows that there is no proper solution to be found within the bounds of the behavior within the animal kingdom, but only the creative powers of mankind, which no lower form of life could express. Time and space have often been presented and presumed among mankind mistakenly as to be the combination of separated qualities of time plus space. These qualities, which were often mistakenly presumed to contain mankind and the human mind as separated factors in human existence. Instead of the still commonplace era, the human mind, as Vladimir Ivanovich had come to understand it, is unknown among the lower forms of life. It is not separated by the still popular but foolish notions of time plus space. The notion of merely animal space and time, as containing the actions specific to the human mind, is a delusion. When pursued by mankind, it becomes a fraud against the noetic powers. The human creative powers, which are uniquely specific to those human powers, which are absent from the merely human animal mind. It is the increase of the productive powers unique to productive human labor, as rejecting notions of separated qualities of time and space, which defies the great folly commonly experienced among the nations, as Vladimir Ivanovich had warned. The principle of chemistry, upon which the practice of life as such depends, lies essentially in the upward evolutionary development of the human species, like no other known species. It thus subordinates space and time to advances in the powers of human labor, as he had presented that great principle unique to humanity. The separation of space from time is therefore a notion rooted toward human bestiality, as Vladimir Ivanovich had shown. It is the uniquely noetic powers of the human mind, as uniquely within itself, which must dominate the behavioral activities of all forms of life on this planet, that according to the uniquely noetic powers of life of the human species. That means the willful power of increase of the energy flux density of the human species' power to effect the revolutionary development of Earth's characteristics within the solar system. The truth of that matter of science is directly contrary to the wicked doctrines of such as both the foolish David Hilbert of 1900 and with the satanic Bertrand Russell of the 20th century. Both of those critters had excluded the principle of chemistry, that is, of life, from the 20th century and later notions of economy. The doctrine of Hilbert and Russell has been, in fact, the principal source of the actual collapse of the economy of both the United States and Western Europe since the assassination of President John F. Kennedy and since the pro-satanic environmentalist destruction of the economies of the transatlantic sector of this planet relative to the present. Eurasian progressive trends toward developments in important major sectors of Eurasia presently are crucial. So instead of the era of space and time as such, the fact of the inherent immortality expressed by the very fact of successive generations of the human mind finds no proper comparison with the mere animal kingdom as such. Time and space, as merely imagined by such pitiable, misguided, modern, current popular opinion, misleads the still credulous into treating the human mind as a mere subject of the domain of dead and living matter combined. Thus, merely animal space finds no proper comparison with the actual meaning of the human mind. In fact, there is no coincidence between the animal kingdom as such and those intrinsically noetic, that is to say, creative powers of the human mind, which have been indicated by Vladimir Ivanovich. Vladimir Ivanovich's notion of the acting will's noetic shaping of the process of life on Earth and beyond thus defines the relationships of time and space within the bounds of the noetic achievements expressed in terms of subordination of space and time occurring under the existence of mankind. Thus, his distinction of that true principle of human time, as distinct from the notions of animal time otherwise, is a principle of human life, which carries imports beyond anything customarily otherwise, especially respecting the unique role of man in creating true science. Now our subject must be slightly shifted in emphasis. Now the matter is that once we brought the present follies of the nations into an urgently needed immediate order among them, war as an institution must be fast relegated to the past, not by force, but by the authority of the informed mind and practice of mankind. Thus, the reality of the presently rising threats of thermonuclear capability for extermination warfare, planet-wide, requires that we lift our spirits and passions above the notions of mass warfare dominant during earlier times. The work of Vladimir Ivanovich, when suitably considered by actually qualified scientists in these subject matters, must be presently re-examined with the most vigorous and rigorous search for relevance and attention. We need a retrospective insight into the imperfections of the previous notions of evidence. There must be a proverbially fresh kind of view of universal relevance, beyond the merely conventional meaning of the name of universal principle. This time, we must be informed by what human represents when taken beyond the common past, but commonly mistaken notions of the bounds of our solar system. Now, instead of space and time as such, the fact of the inherent immortality expressed by the very fact of the successive generations of successively progressive developments of the human mind finds no proper comparison within the animal kingdom as such. Time and space, in animal space, have no expression comparable to that which has been identified scientifically as the intrinsically biologically noetic evolutionary characteristics associated with the imperative of perpetual human scientific progress. All species of life, excepting human life, will ultimately come and pass in no other way than as man either maintains them or does not. That is according to what mankind has adopted as the assigned mission within the universe. Mankind is therefore for us properly a truly immortal species whose essential existential expression of what we call human progress, or named justly so, as the right of each child, of a parent, to seek a better quality of universe than each might have otherwise achieved. We live and we die, but we wish the kind of scientific and kindred modes of practice in which each generation, if it were freed to do so, can be the incarnation of what has not been achieved, both as mankind, earlier or otherwise, provided that the organization of society is composed according to the actually noetic principles properly incarnate in the progressive development to higher levels of creative human achievement, imparted to those higher forms of expression within our universe. Mankind is not merely a living creature. On the contrary, as I've recognized implicitly as the work of Vladimir Ivanovich, that man transcends all other categories of known forms of life, and that absolutely. The truth lies not in the notion of the passage of time as such, but only on the uniquely superior universal principle of the active principle of human life as such. The currently most essential threat to mankind as a species is what is called the reductionist or green principle of zero energy. Notably, at the beginning of the 20th century, there were, as I've said here earlier, there were evil prophets in so-called modern science. The first, which I mentioned here in order, came in the year 1900. France's foolish David Hilbert, who proposed then in Paris to eliminate the necessity for physical science and its replacement by mere arithmetic. A decade or so later, the British Empire's virtual child of Satan himself, Bertrand Russell, had launched a sort of total war against science and humanity alike, a hatred subsisting through a total sort of war against actual science, since his war against science during the 1920s. This had been done by him for the stated purpose of suppression, even termination, of both physically science and even the reversal of human progress instead. Consequently, since about the time of the ouster of Germany's Chancellor Bismarck, who had been the peacemaker among Germany, Russia, Austro-Hungary, and other nations, had a sudden seizure of acute moral decadence that had been unleashed by the British Empire. The assassination of France's President Carnot had been the first major step to the launching of what would actually become World War I globally, as continued for merely a mere moment until the next suspension of general warfare after what is known as Versailles. So, beginning of the 20th century, a moral decadence has radiated throughout most of the planet, radiating chiefly from a freshly enlarged British Empire, which has continued to curse the welfare of the planet generally, leading into the most presently renewed and continued warfare, radiating worldwide today, from that British Empire up through the present date. The lesson urgently to be learned is that now, the presently accelerating decline of the Americas, Western Europe, Africa, and the Middle East, since world warfare of the 1980s up to the present time, had become the immediate result definitively for the Americans since the assassinations of U.S. President John F. Kennedy and his brother, the Robert Kennedy, assassinated a day before his nomination for President of the United States. Since the beginning of the 1970s, the U.S. physical economy has been in a predominating mood of a still accelerating collapse, especially since the definitive monetary crisis of 1972 and its Anglo-American reflections. At the same time, a trend of moral and economic decline of the physical, economic, and moral qualities of the nations of the transatlantic region has been a continued trend of physical, economic, and social collapse since then to the present day. Now, also, there is the presently accelerating decline of the combined regions of Western Europe, Africa, regions of the Near East, and the Americas as a whole. Thus, since the beginning of the 20th century, there's been a moral and subsequently economic decline over the transatlantic region as a whole, which becomes clear when that is considered from the standpoint earlier than 1900 to the present date. In fact, it is my knowledge that only relevant improvements in the choice of the presently incumbent President of the United States were likely to reverse a presently threatened early Balian collapse throughout the transatlantic region and implicitly beyond that area. Certain necessarily and systemic remedies in the nature of a return to the original Constitution of the United States could reverse the presently imminent general collapse of the economies of the entire transatlantic regions. Otherwise, the situation of the transatlantic region were catastrophic, virtually globally and nearly in time. It is my best knowledge that only relevant transformations in the leadership of the United States government itself could prevent a now impending general bail-in financial collapse, now underway, of the transatlantic and related sectors. Relevant, immediate improvements in the U.S. presidency itself could curb that danger to the entire transatlantic region, if they were willing. My own publicly stated expert report on the relevant principles for the U.S. government presently would be a key to a needed solution if the British Empire's Zeusian grip were removed. If my proposed, actually presently publicized options for change in improvements were to be taken up, a physical economic recovery of the planetary economy is presently feasible among cooperating nations, even if the progress were regrettably initially slow. Our intention must be that an immortal human species must recover its true mission and live on so presently. No ordinary time, but Vladimir Ivanovich's own definition of our human species' life as the only true measure of human life must live on for mankind's destiny as an implicitly immortal species, as a representative of an immortal species extending its influence from Earth beyond menacing asteroids throughout our solar system and perhaps beyond, a destiny named humanity.